The mornings in Los Angeles are characterized by an unusual variety of chilly. Not as frigid as New York. Not as arid as Texas. The cold in this location is moderate, permeating the trees along Vermont Avenue and striking me in the face each time I emerge from my compact apartment. I tighten the straps of my knapsack, exhale deeply, and allow the fresh air to infiltrate my lungs. I have been utilizing this vehicle for the past 2 years, ever since I enrolled at UCLA. However, something is distinct this morning. The 7:54 bus proceeds at a leisurely pace to the stop. I observe its distinctive yellow hue, which is conspicuous in contrast to the heavy traffic on Wilshire Boulevard. Ethan Cole, the bus driver, nods to me as usual as the door opens. "Charlotte, good morning." I gaze upward at him, his deep brown eyes reflecting the dim streetlights. Ethan consistently comports himself in this manner. Unhurried, stable, and composed. He was nearly 7 years older than I, at approximately 27. However, he consistently appeared to possess a greater understanding of life than any of my acquaintances. "Good morning, Ethan," I said, attempting to conceal the peculiar sensation that was arising within me. I proceed to my customary position by the window. The bus's interior was consistent with its usual appearance. A few students were engrossed in their phones while music was gently playing from someone's headphones. The steady flipping of a reader was also present. Therefore, what was the reason for my perception that today was distinct? I came to the realization that I had forgotten my notebook at home as the bus turned onto Sunset Boulevard. My spine was tingled with a faint sense of panic. I searched my knapsack in the hopes that I had inadvertently included it. Yet this is not the case. Disgusting. Closed my eyes and inhaled deeply. Without it, I would be compelled to sift through my notes in preparation for the microeconomics exam that will be administered next week. Ethan's voice emanated from the front at precisely the same moment that I was contemplating the situation. "Have you forgotten something?" I raised my head to observe him in the rearview mirror. I exhaled. "Yes. My notebook." There I meticulously documented all pertinent information. For a brief period, Ethan maintained his silence. Then, to my complete astonishment, he reached toward the dashboard and retrieved a notebook that was familiar to me, a black leather-bound notebook. This morning, I observed it on the back of the seat. I believed that someone might return to retrieve it. I abruptly rose from my seat, my eyes widening. "Please refrain from informing me." He extended the notebook to me. I promptly removed it and opened it. It was present. Still intact were the pages of my penmanship. Each note an underline. "You are a salvation, my God." I was unable to conceal the expression of relief on my face. Ethan's lips curled upward as he shrugged, simply adhering to the correct course of action. However, I was aware that it was not a trivial matter. I resumed my perch. However, this time I refrained from gazing out the window. I was gazing forward, observing Ethan's attention on the road. Upon traveling this route for the first time in 2 years, I began to contemplate the individual operating the vehicle. There was something peculiar about him. Additionally, I was unable to assign a name to it. As a result, I began to observe details that I had previously overlooked. Ethan was not merely a bus conductor. He served as an observer. He never considered driving from point A to point B to be a monotonous task. He gave individual attention to each passenger on the bus, the manner in which they embarked, their seating arrangements, even the manner in which they exhaled on a leisurely Monday morning. I am uncertain as to when I began to pay him particular attention. It is possible that it was the day he discovered my notebook. Alternatively, it may have occurred prior to that. However, I was preoccupied with my personal affairs and failed to observe the situation. I boarded the bus every morning, and Ethan was consistently punctual, consistently with a composed look. However, this time I began to observe each and every action he took, rather than merely saying greeting and passing by. Ethan would wait patiently for a few additional seconds at each stop, as if to ensure that no one missed the bus. He consistently kept an umbrella near the front door on stormy days, prepared to assist someone in need. He frequently presented candy or modest gift to the children who rode the bus to school. Additionally, I observed a young boy's face light up with joy upon receiving an antiquated toy vehicle. And most significantly, he maintained his composure. It did not matter how boisterous the bus became. Whether an individual inadvertently spilled an object that caused a disturbance to others, or whether there was a passenger who was inebriated and disruptive, Ethan maintained an unwavering composure. He never shouted, never became agitated, an exceedingly calm demeanor and an endless supply of patience. Additionally, I began to extend my bus rides. Previously, I would enter, bow, and take a seat. However, I have recently begun to engage in conversations with Ethan. Initially, it was merely a casual conversation. It is certainly colder today. Wow! Yes, the Santa Ana wind is beginning to blast. However, our conversations grew in length over time. I learned that Ethan's existence was significantly different prior to his employment as a bus driver. He was previously employed as a mechanic. However, for some unknown cause, he resolved to alter his profession. He had a passion for literature, particularly those that pertain to psychology and philosophy, something that I had not anticipated. Ethan once looked at me in the rearview mirror as I entered the bus, bleary-eyed from a late night of studying. "Are you once again staying up late?" I was amused. Indeed, I believe that I will succumb to sleep deprivation prior to my graduation. His lips curled slightly. "What is the matter?" According to a Harvard study, memory retention is diminished by 40% as a result of sleep deprivation. I averted my gaze. "Right? You just made that up, correct?" "False. I encountered it in a newspaper article." He laughed. "However, if you truly desire to improve your memory, it may be beneficial to retire earlier rather than remaining awake throughout the night." I was amused. Good advice, provided that I am capable of implementing it. Ethan shook his head. However, I was unable to ignore the subtle concern that was evident in his gaze. Something was evolving. I was uncertain as to the exact moment it commenced. However, I was certain of one thing. Conversations with Ethan had become the pinnacle of my day. Prior to this, the bus served as a monotonous component of my daily schedule, transporting me to school. However, it had evolved into something more. Greetings in the morning. Farewells in the afternoon. Small talk occurs between pauses. There is a transformation underway. I was hesitant to assign it a name. However, I was aware. I was beginning to anticipate the bus journeys in a manner that I had never experienced before. The city of Los Angeles is not characterized by abundant precipitation. However, the sky was obscured by dense gray clouds today. Upon boarding the 754 bus, the initial droplets of rain were already falling, causing long streaks on the windows and pattering on the roof. I walked to my seat, flicked a few droplets from my hair, and pulled my jacket tighter. Ethan was present, as he always is, and he gave his usual composed assent. "Greetings, Charlotte." "Good morning, Ethan." I reciprocated with a smile. However, this time I refrained from hastening to take my seat. I positioned myself slightly closer to the driver's seat and gazed out the window. The streets, which are typically sunlit, were now a reflection of the water. I was not anticipating the downpour. I murmured. Ethan's lips curled slightly. "Welcome to one of the few days in which the weather in Los Angeles accurately resembles that of Seattle." I was amused. The entire metropolis must be in a state of disarray. "Certainly." His gaze remained fixed on the road ahead, and he nodded. Traffic can be impeded for hours by a small amount of precipitation. Silently, I gazed at him. The manner in which he spoke and his deep voice elicited a peculiar sense of solace in me. I was unsure of the reason for my actions, but I refrained from immediately returning to my seat. Ethan briefly examined the rearview mirror, as if to acknowledge that I was still standing. "What is the situation?" When he inquired, his tone was gentle yet inquisitive. After blinking, I shook my head. Nothing. Just thinking. He inclined his head slightly. Regarding what? I gazed out the window. Raindrops were splattered on the glass, leaving behind narrow streaks. Do you ever experience feelings of being stuck? I abruptly spoke, uncertain as to the rationale behind my statement. For a brief period, Ethan maintained his silence. He then gradually touched the steering wheel. You are aware that vehicles have a feature known as the kneeling function. I averted my gaze. What is the matter? He smiled, his eyes sparkling with mischief. The bus's front is lowered to reduce the height of the boarding process for passengers. I was unable to instantaneously comprehend his intentions, and I blinked. Consequently, are you implying that vehicles are capable of bowing? Ethan laughed, a deep, warm chuckle that elicited a peculiar sense of comfort in me. That is the essence of the matter. I also chuckled. I will never regard vehicles in the same manner again. Once more, Ethan gave a slight assent. Sometimes even the most unyielding objects can be slightly altered to assist others. He gazed at me, and I suddenly comprehended the significance of that statement. We are not truly ensnared. We have yet to determine how to implement change. I came to the realization that this was no longer merely a conversation as I listened to the rain patter on the windshield at that moment. It was something more. I resumed my seat, but Ethan's words continued to haunt me. I refrained from gazing outside for the remainder of the journey. I gazed forward where he was still preoccupied with the task of driving. I was uncertain as to whether the conversation or the weather was the cause. However, I experienced hotter. For the first time, I was perplexed. Was I anticipating this bus for reasons other than its ability to transport me to school? I was unable to precisely determine the time at which it commenced. However, I gradually came to the realization that Ethan was devoting more attention to me than was customary. Not in a manner that is overt or unsettling. Not at all. It was the small expressions of concern, the subtle gestures, that I had previously overlooked. Or it is possible that I had neglected to acknowledge the situation. Ethan tuned the radio to my preferred song as I boarded the bus one morning. I was momentarily paralyzed, but he continued to gaze forward in a vacant manner, as if it were a mere coincidence. I casually referenced an impending examination on another occasion. And the following morning, before I disembarked from the bus, Ethan simply stated, "You will be fine." There will be no hollow encouragement or flowery language. Although they were merely 4 words, they remained in my mind for the remainder of the day. And then I drifted off to slumber. I was unaware of my exhaustion until my body surrendered to the comfortable seat and drifted off to slumber as the bus continued its journey home. Everything was unusually silent when I opened my eyes. I blinked several times before I realized that the bus had halted. Ethan was standing in close proximity to my seat, gazing down with a firm yet gentle expression. "Charlotte." He spoke in a gentle voice that was sufficient to awaken me from my slumber. I blinked, recognizing that the bus was devoid of passengers. I had dropped asleep. I sat up, feverishly scanning the area. My halt. Ethan has just inclined his head toward the window. I peered outside and observed that my residence was situated only a few feet away. He had deviated slightly from the path to ensure that I did not awaken in an unfamiliar location. I gazed at him, uncertain about what to say. He stated that you are a profound sleeper. His voice was a mixture of concern and mirth. I was hesitant to rouse you up too early, but I was unable to allow you to wake up without knowing your location. I experienced an unusual sensation of warmth in my chest. I muttered, still partly asleep, "You were not required to do that." Ethan shook his head. "It is acceptable. It appears that you are in dire need of a respite." I felt something catch in my bosom as I pursed my lips. No one had ever shown me such authentic concern without anticipating any reciprocation. I paused as I stood up to disembark from the bus. I swiveled to observe him. "Thank you, Ethan." I stated it in a subdued manner this time. However, I was aware that he had heard, and for the first time, I believed that I may have begun to anticipate more than just the routine bus trip. I arrived at the bus stop slightly earlier the following morning. Upon the arrival of the 754 train, I did not immediately board and locate a seat. Before I returned, I transferred the cup of steaming coffee to Ethan. I stated the matter in a straightforward manner in order to enhance the journey's convenience. His face was bewildered, but he soon broke into a gentle smile. "It appears that I am now indebted to you," he jokingly said, subsequently stealing my coffee. I was unable to resist the smile that swept across my lips and shrugged, simply adhering to the correct course of action. That was the first time I came to the realization. There was more to our interaction than a mere fleeting conversation. It was something genuine. I was unable to determine the precise date on which it commenced. It is possible that the day Ethan returned my notebook was the occasion, or the dreary morning that he referenced. The bus's kneeling function as a metaphor. Alternatively, it is possible that it has always been present. I had simply failed to note it. Whatever it was, I was aware that circumstances had altered. I had relied on the bus as a means of transportation to attend school. However, it had now evolved into something additional. I no longer merely boarded the bus, bowed, and sat down. I began to observe the minutiae, things that I may have overlooked over the past 2 years. After a lengthy night of studying, I boarded the bus on Monday morning bleary-eyed. Ethan did not inquire whether I was fatigued. He did not offer any platitudes such as, "You should get more sleep." The song was played as soon as he reached for the radio. The song was my personal preference. I gazed at him. However, his attention was directed toward the roadway that lay ahead. He maintained a slight grin on his face. Not a single word was spoken. However, I was aware. He recalled. On another afternoon, I was engrossed in pages of perplexing microeconomics while studying on the bus. I promptly rose from my seat upon reaching my destination, prepared to disembark. As soon as Ethan's voice was heard, "Charlotte." I reversed my direction. "Please remember this." The pin he held up was one that I had not even realized I had dropped. I gazed at him. Then I looked at the pin in my hand. My chest was enveloped in a balmy sensation. I was unaware that I had misplaced it. Ethan shook his head. "I possess a keen eye." I was amused. Then he removed the stylus from his hand. "I appreciate it." I exited the vehicle. However, my pulse continued to beat at a faster pace than it typically does. Ethan was not inclined to engage in conversation heavily. He did not require any words to demonstrate his concern. Occasionally, a mere glance sufficed. Similar to the occasion when I referenced the forthcoming examination. I did not. Do not anticipate anything more than a casual greeting. However, the following morning, before I exited the vehicle, Ethan casually stated, "You will succeed." And that was all I required to hear. Prior to this, I anticipated the vehicles. I eagerly anticipated the moments I would spend with Ethan. Greetings in the morning. Farewells in the afternoon. Between pauses, there are brief talks. Small but significant actions. I came to the realization that the seemingly insignificant actions he took were not insignificant. Furthermore, I was uncertain whether I could continue to regard him as merely a bus driver. Los Angeles was as active as ever. However, I experienced a sense of deficiency in the city today. Everything was proceeding as usual. I arose, swiftly exited my compact apartment, and proceeded to the bus stop, where I awaited the arrival of the recognizable number 7, which was 4 feet in length. However, when the bus arrived and the door opened, I observed Ethan behind the wheel and realized that something was amiss. Distinct. He extended his customary greeting to me. Nevertheless, with a subtle nod. I continued to speak with the same cordial tone. "Charlotte, good morning." However, this time there was a distinction within his eye. I entered the vehicle, but my thoughts continued to stray. Even after I sat down, this sensation persisted. It persisted in my thoughts throughout the entire journey. Near the school, the vehicle halted. I was proceeding down the corridor, passing through the classrooms, when I overheard a group of instructors conversing in the vicinity of the faculty office. I was initially inattentive. Nevertheless, then a sentence was uttered, compelling me to cease immediately. He received an employment offer, an improved position, a higher salary. I have been informed that he is contemplating his departure. I was uncertain as to who made that statement. However, I was aware that they were discussing Ethan. I maintained my position for a brief period, attempting to assimilate the information that had been conveyed to me. Ethan was departing. I breathe. I am experiencing a chilling airflow that sweeps across my chest. However, I was unable to articulate the reason. He was not my closest companion. I was not his partner. He was merely a bus conductor. Is that correct? Then why was my heart so tightly clenched? I was unable to focus on the lecture that day. I entertained the notion of Ethan, regarding our informal discussions, regarding the small acts of kindness that he performed that I had not perceived until recently. I was compelled to ascertain the truth. I arrived at the bus stop earlier than I typically do that afternoon. I boarded the bus and gazed directly at Ethan upon its arrival. Do you have any significant plans? I inquired. I am endeavoring to maintain a cheerful tone in my voice. The expression of Ethan was one of astonishment. However, he did not respond immediately. He gazed at me through the rearview mirror, prior to returning his attention to the road ahead. What do you mean? I pretended to be indifferent by shrugging. It is merely, there was a report that you had received an employment offer. For only a few seconds, he maintained his silence. He then exhaled. News disseminates rapidly. I fixed my gaze on him. Consequently, is that accurate? Ethan did not respond immediately. He quietly replied yes after a brief interval. I am contemplating it. I felt a tug on my emotions. I was uncertain as to what I had anticipated, but upon hearing him, confirming it caused me to experience a sensation similar to that of having a familiar aspect of my existence removed. I inhaled. Are you planning to depart? The steering wheel was gently grasped by Ethan. I am uncertain. I was interested in learning the reason for his desire to depart. However, I was unable to do so. I intended to convey that I did not wish for him to depart. However, I was unable to do so. Instead, I simply nodded. I comprehend the situation. However, in all honesty, I did not. I am unable to comprehend anything. And for the first time, I came to the realization that I did not want to miss our morning conversations or his farewell wishes. I was opposed to his departure. However, I was uncertain as to whether I was authorized to make that statement. In Los Angeles, it was pouring. This evening, not the type of precipitation that intermittently occurred. However, the streets were transformed into mirrors that reflected the flickering streetlights beneath a light, steady rainfall. The frigid air was misted by my breath as I stood outside the bus stop, my hands buried in my coat pockets. The headlights illuminated the damp pavement as the 754 rolled slowly up to the stop. A door was unveiled. Ethan remained seated as he had consistently done. However, this time I observed something in his gaze. Apprehension. Concern that remains unaddressed. I attempted to enter the vehicle, but I refrained. Please take my seat immediately. Facing him, I stood there. Are you aware that this may be your final evening? I inquired, my voice subdued, but I was unable to conceal the tension. For a brief period, Ethan gazed at me before nodding. Indeed, my heart rate plummeted as I tightened my grasp on my bag. I was aware. I had anticipated this response. However, this knowledge did not alleviate the situation. I exhaled deeply. Have you made a decision yet? Ethan lightly tapped his fingers on the steering wheel as he peered at it. A prolonged period of silence ensued between us. He finally said, "I believe we should leave," his voice so low that I could scarcely hear it. I averted my gaze. "For what reason?" He chuckled, his smile failing to extend to his eyes. "For the reason that it presents an advantageous opportunity. I should experiment with a novel activity." "Do too." He paused before exhaling. "Because it is possible that I should not be confined to this location indefinitely." I clenched my fists, my chest constricting with an emotion that eluded me. "Are you truly interested in attending?" I inquired. Ethan gazed directly into my eyes. There was no immediate response. That concluded the matter. I felt a weight on my chest as I swallowed. I was unable to permit him to depart without expressing my opinion. It was impossible to deny that this mattered. There was no way to deny his significance. I exhaled deeply. You cannot simply proceed and act as though none of this is significant. Ethan's irises became inky. "Charlotte, I would like to conclude." I advanced, drawing nearer to him. "I am aware that you believe this is merely a work. I am aware that you believe you are merely a bus conductor. However, Ethan, you are more than just the individual who transports me to school each day. You are the reason I eagerly anticipate each morning. You are the first individual to observe when I neglect something. You are the sole individual who can recall my beloved song without my prompting. You are." I was overcome with emotion. "You are an integral component of my existence." The final sentence caused my voice to break. Ethan gazed at me. His eyes were in a state of confusion. I was unaware of my expectations. He said he would stay solely for me, which surprised me. However, I was unable to bid him farewell without conveying the significance of his presence to me. The rain continued to pour outside, droplets cascading down the bus windows. As if he had been retaining his breath throughout the conversation, Ethan finally exhaled a small breath. He cocked his head, his eyes filled with a light that I was unable to understand. His voice was subdued and languorous as he stated, "I never believed that I had anything to lose here. Until you articulated it." There was an extended period of silence between us. Next, Ethan produced a guffaw. Buses are capable of kneeling to alleviate the need for passengers to ascend to an excessively high level. However, they are also capable of standing, which allows them to transport individuals to their desired destination. I gazed at him with a frown. "What are you attempting to convey?" Although he shrugged, his eyes were gentler than they had ever been. "It is possible that I am not yet prepared to depart." 1 week afterward, the 754 bus was still in operation, rolling along the well-known path. Ethan was still seated when I arrived. His eyes were still, but they were brimming with a novel sensation. Certainty. He wished me a pleasant morning. His voice was recognizable, but it was now warmer than it had been previously. I grinned. "Good morning, Ethan." The rain resumed as I sat down. "Gently apply pressure to the window." However, this time the rain was not somber. There was a sense of a fresh start. Like what you heard. There's plenty more heartbreak and secrets to come. Hit like, subscribe, and stay curious with Tangled Truths.